In today's tabletop review, we're going to be taking a look at a new product recently introduced, made by Primary Arms. This is their new micro red dot. It carries a part number of MD-RB-AD, which stands for Micro Dot Removable Base Advanced Sight. This is the successor to the very popular MD-ADS red dot sight. And this one actually comes in, the MD-RB-AD, at a retail price of $149.99, which is roughly $20 less than its predecessor, the MD-ADS. Now, both feature a 50,000 hour estimated lifespan off of a single CR2032 battery, and they both have ultra sharp 2 MOA dots. And we'll actually, a little later on in the video, we're going to compare these two so you can get kind of an idea of the differences, cosmetically at least, between the this new one, the MD-RB-AD and the MD-ADS. So the packing material that Primary Arms ships these red dots in is pretty standard. Most of their red dots have a similar type of box design. It is a very appropriate box for shipping, nicely printed with specs and some pictures on them, part numbers and so on. And of course on the inside it's very well, your sight is very well protected with thick foam material, and they may or may not ship in plastic bags. Some red dots don't ship in plastic bags, but this one happens to ship in a plastic bag. So the box, again, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on that, but definitely good box design. Some information on the back of the box here about the red dot sight. I'll just quickly talk about some of the specs here that are on the box. It is IP57 waterproof. It is night vision compatible. There are 2 night vision settings, 11 brightness settings. Uses a single CR2032 battery, 50,000 hour plus battery life. I believe that's an estimate. It might run longer than that. Each click value is 1 MOA. Total elevation adjustment 60 MOA. Total windage adjustment 60 MOA. Has a length of 2.54 inches. The weight is listed as 5.4 ounces with battery. I've actually weighed both these red dot sights, and we'll talk about that later. This particular red dot has a lifetime warranty on it, so it kind of trumps the MD-ADS, which only has a 3-year warranty, so that's really good. It's made out of 6061 aluminum, which is aircraft quality aluminum. You see that in a lot of AR type parts or firearm parts in general. That's pretty standard. It is a softer aluminum than the 7000 series aluminum that some of the more expensive sights are made out of, but you pay a premium for 7000 series aluminum with anything that you get. Nitrogen purged, and it is compatible with the industry Aimpoint T1 riser mounts. So that's just some of the specs from the back of the box. Inside the box, we've got a Torx wrench, which is for tightening and removing the riser base. It also ships, pretty much most Primary Arms sights ship with VC3 threadlocker, which is similar to probably a blue Loctite. So it, you know, you can put this on the threads and it locks down the threads, but it's not permanent, so you can remove it. What this is basically going to do is prevent any screws from vibrating loose with use. We have a fairly comprehensive user manual on, you know, pretty much everything. Specs, of course, how to remove the base, how to install different risers, how to access a battery compartment, and so on. And then, of course, we have a cleaning cloth. So the included accessories are pretty standard for most red dots. And, of course, the The RB, I'll just call this RB for short, ships with a low riser mount. Now this is suitable for pistols and maybe some firearms like AKs or something that require a low mount. But if you're mounting this on an AR rifle, you're going to need to purchase, which is sold separately, a 1/3 or absolute co-witness riser. And we'll talk about that as well, because I have one here that we're going to test fit on this. And of course, like all of the micro red dots, it ships with a bikini cap cover. Not my favorite covers, but they do get the job done. So with the RB, right off the bat, what you're going to notice is there's no push button controls like on the MD-ADS. Now the MD-ADS, when it was introduced, there was a lot of hype about it. A lot of people loved it. They didn't necessarily warmed up real quick to the fact it had push buttons for intensity adjustments and for turning the red dot on and off. It didn't really bother me personally. I've used the MD-ADS for years now. But you know, the one thing that was somewhat, you know, I wouldn't say with the MD-ADS, the push button controls, you didn't really know what intensity setting you had your sight set at when you had those push button controls. So, you know, when you turn the sight off and you turned it back on, it would remember your last setting, of course, but it didn't tell you that it was at intensity level 4 or 5 or anything like that. So you didn't really have an indicator. You had to just kind of look at the sight or look at the dot and say, okay, that's, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever. Now the RB, they've kind of gone back to their roots, and they've done away with the push button controls, and you now have a dial. So again, like I mentioned, a lot of people preferred the dial, and that was one of the things that a lot of people had issue with the MD-ADS was they did away with the dial and had the push buttons. So now we're going back to the dial setting. So you can see we've got solid, you know, 0 for off. We have N1, N2. Those are 2 night vision settings. And then when we hit 3, then you can see the red dot. Solid clicks. And then, of course, the battery is here in this compartment. You can use a coin right there to loosen that. Now, we also have different windage and elevation caps. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, you've always heard me complain about caps that were flat, because you know, I don't know if Aimpoint was the one who came up with this concept, but the Aimpoint T1 was the first one I saw that had these notches on it, so you could take the cap off and you could use the cap to make your windage and elevation adjustments. And I always thought that is a beautiful feature, and pretty much every micro red dot, their caps should have that feature. And the MD-ADS did not have that. So that's a minor gripe, but that was a gripe that I had. You know, I was like, why don't they have the notch so you can use these for elevation adjustment? And yes, it's not a crisis and it's not a big deal, because you can always use a shell casing to make your adjustments or coin. But I always like the fact that you could use the caps to make these adjustments. Now these elevation adjustments, they are O-ring protected, and these are metal caps, and they have a very, very solid knurling around them. So there shouldn't be any problems gripping these, taking them off and putting them back on, and so on. And you also have that same knurling pattern here on our rotary dial. So it's real easy to get a good grip on this. Your fingers aren't going to be sliding around because it has a smooth surface. It is fairly textured. It's not rough. I mean, it probably could be rougher to provide a more positive grip, but it's suitable, and it does its job just fine. So taking a look through our view window, let's see if we can get this on screen here. Now you'll notice the LED emitter is at the 5 o'clock. That's pretty standard for these micro red dot sights. You'll also notice that it is extremely low profile emitter. So 2 things. Some red dots that have emitters at the 6 o'clock position, and they're not really low profile emitters, and they stick up, so they go straight up. Those can interfere if you're doing 1/3 co-witnessing. Now that's a big problem for people trying to co-witness with iron sights, especially for 1/3 co-witness. Now, by moving the emitter to the 5 o'clock position, first off, you get it out of the way of your 1/3 co-witness. And second, this one's extremely low profile. So we've got two positives here. 5 o'clock position and extremely low profile emitter. So whether you're running absolute co-witness or 1/3 co-witness, you're not going to have anything interfering with your sight picture. And I actually have reviewed red dot sights that have a really large 6 o'clock emitter, and when I mount them on an AR and run with 1/3 co-witness, my partial co-witness sight picture is being blocked by the emitter. Very annoying. You don't have that problem. The MD-ADS did not have that problem, and this did not, and this one does not have that problem. So you have very good visibility through this 25 millimeter window. One of the other things about a lot of other inexpensive red dot sights that this one doesn't have is a lot of the inexpensive sights have heavily tinted glass. And that causes a multitude of different issues. For me, if I'm using a laser bore sighter, it makes it very difficult for me to see the LED emitter if the lenses are heavily tinted. Now, the MD-ADS and the RB, the one right here, the picture is very clear. I'm looking through this. I've got a very, very slight tint to this, but it's almost perfectly clear. So this is a really good sight picture. We have a very, very clear lens with minimal tinting. And of course on the front, we have our typical amber tinting, and of course we have our angled front lens. Now, a lot of questions I get from people, they're like, oh, I've got a defective sight, my lens is at an angle. That's by design, and you're going to see that pretty much on all red dot sights that use a emitter, an LED emitter, to project the dot. You're going to have an angle to the lens, so that's by design. It's not defective, and you didn't get a broken red dot sight, so that's by design. Now, I do have one of these on a rifle, and I am doing some testing right now. And so far, no issues whatsoever. This is just performing perfectly, exactly as I would have expected, and there's no disappointments coming from the Primary Arms MD-ADS red dot sight over to this one. All right, so the riser that this ships with, obviously, like I mentioned, is a low profile riser. There's 4 Torx bolts right here that come off, and then we can install any of the commercially available Aimpoint T1 compatible risers. The crossbar on this mount is the same as the MDS. We have a 1-pin mount with a small clamping portion right here. Now, these are not my favorite type of design. I prefer multiple bolt clamping systems with a larger clamping area. For example, what can we whip out here? This is a Fortis Absolute Co-Witness T1 mount that I happen to have here. This is my preferred type of design for a riser. What we have is this entire bar right here is removable. There are 2 bolts, and you have 2 slotted areas right here. So you have a much larger clamping area to secure this to your upper Picatinny rail. Very good mount. This is an angled one, which I like this design too, because if you mount this all the way forward on your AR, it actually slants the red dot sight a little bit further out, so you can have a little longer sight picture, which I really like. So we're gonna mount. Okay, moving on, let's go ahead and take a look at the RB compared to its predecessor, the MD-ADS, just so we can kind of get an idea of the differences between those two. So this is the MD-ADS that Primary Arms, they still sell this, by the way, at least right now. They still currently sell the MD-ADS, and I have not received any news or any notifications that the MD-ADS is going to be discontinued or anything of that nature. Same type of box setup, same materials that come with it. The box on the MD-ADS is a little bit different. You've got some slots for a battery, but the battery comes installed, and you've got one of these little packets to absorb water. You've got two Torx wrenches here. One is for removing the mount, and the other one is for tightening the bolt down, because they used two different types of bolts. And I do believe on the RB, all of the bolts are the same, so you only need one wrench. So that's convenient too. All right, so now you can see, and we take a look at these, they are fairly close in their dimensions. The one thing that you'll notice is the girth. We are looking at a little bit more girth because of this rotary control with the battery compartment. Now this one is really low profile because it's just the battery compartment. But you'll also notice too on the MD-ADS, the windage and elevation caps are larger. And of course, like I mentioned, they don't have the notches on them for making adjustments. And then, of course, the MD-ADS, if you're not familiar with this one has the push button control. So by pressing these two buttons together, or I believe just one button, you can turn it on, and press two buttons to turn it off, and then the plus to increase the intensity and the minus to decrease the intensity. Same type of low profile base on it. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, the new one is, the new red dot, the RB is $20 cheaper. What's the negative? There's got to be a negative, right? Well, I can't really find any. If you want to be nitpicky, the weight on the MD-RD, which Primary Arms lists it as 5.4 ounces. Now, I weighed it on my scale, my digital scale, and it came out at 5.7 ounces. Maybe their weight didn't include the low profile riser, but I basically took this out of the box as is and put it on my scale and came up with 5.7 ounces. Now I took this MD-ADS and weighed that, and it's 4.4 ounces. So you're looking at a weight increase with the RB of 1.3 ounces. So that's the only negative. It weighs more, 1.3 ounces. If that's an issue, that's a pretty trivial amount of weight, in my opinion, to worry about. So to me, that's not really a negative. That's just that's really the only thing I can actually say about it at this point. The RB, like mentioned, lifetime warranty. The MD-ADS only a 3-year warranty. I can go either way when it comes to the push button controls or the rotary control, but I've used Aimpoints and Bushnells, microdots, and they've all had the rotary control. So I was quite used to those before I switched over to the MD-ADS. So it took a while for me to get used to the push buttons, but it definitely wasn't an issue. So you can kind of see. Well, you can't see this because I'm looking at it right now, but here, let's see. We can get kind of a look here. You can see both of these have extremely low profile emitters at the 5 o'clock position, and the tinting of both of these lenses, as far as I can see by looking at this, again, you can't see this because I'm actually looking at it. Because I'm looking at through my onto my white table here, so it definitely will allow me to tell if there's a difference in color. There's a very, very slight tint on both of them. To me, both of these look identical. So there's, one isn't darker than the other, or one is clearer than the other. To me, they're identical. Let's see, the emitter on the RB is more in the 5 o'clock position. The MD-ADS, the emitter, is more like the 5:30 position. And the MD-ADS emitter is a little bit lower profile than the RB's emitter. See if you notice that it's a little bit lower profile. To me, that's a non-issue, mainly because neither of these interfere with 1/3 or absolute co-witness on your AR rifle. Of course, I'm an AR person, so I don't run AKs or anything else that might use other types of iron sights for co-witnessing, so I can't really comment on that. Now the elevation and the windage adjustments, we've already taken these off once. Well, you can see that's a pretty wide base right there compared to the MD-ADS. And they're different adjustments. So these are a little bit thinner, those are a little bit wider, but the shell casing works on both of these just fine. We've got a similar outer design. I mean, I do believe both of these are 6061 aluminum with a Type 3 hard coat anodized finish. And let's see if there's any other specs here I have. The MD-RB-AD is designed for use on heavy recoiling rifles such as shotguns. And the waterproofing supposedly is improved over the previous models. The turret caps are listed as now being aluminum instead of plastic and tightened down around the waterproofing O-rings until metal-to-metal contact with the scope body. When removed, the turret caps can be used to adjust windage and elevation. That's some information directly from Primary Arms website. Yeah, these new turret caps are definitely more robust. There's no doubt about that. They come off easier, they go on easier, and the knurling helps. The MD-ADS knurling, there is some knurling on there, but it's not very aggressive, and I do believe these are plastic. That's what I do believe that's what Primary Arms is referring to in their information, is that these are plastic. So that's kind of a comparison. I guess we take a look at the bottom of it too. I don't know what the large screw is, in case you're going to inquire about that, as I have not taken this base off yet. We're going to do that here in a minute. But that a large Phillips screw, I don't believe that's something that you would service. Maybe that's a screw, a plug for the nitrogen, because these are nitrogen filled, so you definitely probably don't want to remove that screw. The MD-ADS has something similar underneath the riser mount. So let's set the MDS aside for a second. I'm going to go ahead and use the included Torx and remove that, and well, I guess we'll just do it on camera real quick, or at least I'll remove one of the screws on camera. I'll remove the rest on camera, because you know how some of that can get pretty boring. Yeah, the screws are not on very tight. Alright, I removed one on camera. The other three I'm going to remove off camera. There is no Loctite on these screws as installed, so you could use the included thread locker to lock these down after you get it, or after you switch out your riser. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of these off camera, and we'll be right back. Okay, we've got our low profile riser removed, and it looks like a couple of these screws did have what appear to be some sort of thread locker on them. The first screw I took off did not have thread locker. The second one I took off did appear to have some on it. So for some reason there's, as you can see right there, no, your camera's not going to want to focus on that, but anyway, there's a little bit of thread locker on a couple of those. So again, like I mentioned, I've got a Fortis T1 mount here, designed specifically for the Aimpoint T1. And let's go ahead and test fit this. And sure enough, basically the trick when it comes to these is where the screw holes are, and then of course this cross pin right here. Some red dot sights on the market have what appear to be T1 compatible mounts. but this cross pin is either larger or it's moved, which makes T1 mounts not compatible with the red dots, which to me is a ridiculous thing for a manufacturer to do. Unless there's some licensing or a patent or something that would prevent you from doing this, which I highly doubt, because we're looking at a second generation, or at least a second generation primary arms red dot that has T1 compatible design on it, or T1 mount compatible. So you can see we have a perfect lineup right here. We'll just go ahead and put one screw in just as a test fit. Make sure that everything lines up. And when installing screws like this, they should never go in hard. You should never have to really force these in. That kind of means you're cross-threading it, and that's not something you want to do. And on that note, let me give you a little caveat about this. This is 6061 aluminum. It's soft aluminum. These are steel screws or some sort of a harder material than aluminum. If you cross thread one of these screws into these aluminum threads, you can rip the threads out. There are no steel inserts for the threads for these screws. So you do not want to cross thread a screw going into the a soft aluminum body like this. So you want to be real careful. They should screw in real easy. If there's any resistance, back it out, realign it, try it again. Just be real careful. So you can see with this Fortis Aimpoint T1 mount, it fits perfectly. All four holes line up. I just mounted one screw here. That works great. Now, Primary Arms has some risers that they sell that are T1 compatible risers. Now, this Fortis riser right here is a little bit more expensive. For the aforementioned reasons I mentioned, it's got a different mounting system on it, which I really like. Now, Primary Arms has got a couple of other risers that are branded underneath their name, and they're relatively inexpensive. So if you need to get a 1/3 or an absolute co-witness riser for this red dot, you can see this is a Primary Arms riser right here. It's hollow inside, and this one I do believe is a 1/3 co-witness riser. Box doesn't say, but this one is relatively inexpensive. I think it's $25–30, something like that. So they've got this one that's compatible, and they also have one that's made by Radical Firearms. I do believe this still carries the PA name on it. It may not have the logo on it. I've had this one for a little while. This is another, this has the PA logo on it. This one's made by Radical Firearms. This one's a little bit more expensive. It still has the small mounting plane on it, but it does have 2 pins on it. I kind of like this design here. It's cut through. Again, this is an absolute co-witness. This is another nice one. A little bit more expensive than this one, but both get the job done. All right, so we'll go ahead and take this off and put the low profile riser back on it. All right, so now let's move on. Let's actually take a look at the functionality here, saving that kind of towards to the last. So 0 would be off, N1 and N2 would be 2 night vision settings. Of course, with N1 or N2 on, you're not going to be able to see anything. So if we move up to 3, we get a very dim dot, which is probably not going to be captured here. So go to 4. I can see the dot a little bit. You probably can't. 5. That's a little bit better. 6. It's a very small, crisp dot. Now, I do suffer from eye stigma that does not allow me to see a clear, round red dot. It kind of looks like a little star to me. That's just an issue. So if you do, if you are jumping into the red dot arena and this is your first red dot and you get a red dot and you look through it and you're like, wow, that looks blurry or it looks like a star, chances are it's not the red dot. It's you have a eye stigma. I don't recall off the top of my head exactly what it's called, but you can Google that, eye stigma, red dot sites, blurry red dot, and read all about it. So it's there's not much you can do to correct that particular issue. When I'm using a red dot, I will normally run my irons for co-witnessing. So if I have a peep aperture in the rear and I'm looking through that, that helps with the blurry or the star type of problem. And I also wear polarized sunglasses when I'm shooting, mainly outside, not so much inside. Both of those can help somewhat. Anyway, moving on, intensity level 7. 8, 9, let's just skip some of these. You don't need to, well, probably don't want to see them all. 11 is the brightest, and I can actually see that on the camera now. So there's 11. So the dot, again, is a 2 MOA dot. It is very small, it's very crisp, not unlike the MD-ADS. And normally I would say for a sub $200 optic, this is incredible, but we're talking a sub $150 optic now. So the technology is getting better, the designs are getting better, and the optics are incredible for the amount of money, for the small amount of money that you're spending. I don't want to sound like the 150 is a lot of money. You start thinking about how much money you're spending on optics when you drop $700 on an Aimpoint, and you're like, well, wait a minute, my rifle costs that just about. So very, very good optics here. Very clear glass. It's not 100% clear, but I've never seen an optic that was 100% clear. All of them seem to have a little bit of a tint to them, but very, very clear. Very happy with the optic on this. So this is the high intensity setting, or the highest setting, which is 11 on the RB. Now, if we go back to the MD-ADS, let's go ahead and crank this one on. Again, I have to push the buttons, and I don't quite know when I get to the highest setting. I just have to keep pushing until it stops getting bright, and then I know that I've gotten to the highest setting. So I've got the MD-ADS over here on the right, and the RB on the left. Both are set to their maximum intensity levels. And let's see if we can capture that on camera. I'm looking at a view screen, so I'm doing the best I can. So there are both dots at the highest intensity level, so you can kind of get a comparison on camera. Let's crank it down to about 6, so we're down like 5 levels. Which you may not be able to see that. Let's just crank it down a couple of levels. I do believe those both should be set to about 8. So I cranked it down from 11 to 8. And you may or may not be able to see this. I can barely see it in the view screen. But I'm not really seeing a difference in the dot or the yeah, they look absolutely identical to me. But then again, I have an eye stigma, so I would not be the best person to say how great the dot is. But you know, it's I don't notice any difference at all. So we've got the dot pattern. Now, one thing about this is when you crank it all the way up to 11, you can't turn past 11 to turn it off. You got to crank it back all the way in the other direction to turn it off. So we got a positive click on each one of these. Now the battery compartment, you can use a coin to remove that. I've already loosened this up. We'll just go ahead and take that off, and you can see that it comes pre-installed with a CR2032 battery, and it just pops in there. Now, one thing about batteries is it's always good with batteries to keep the oils from your fingers off of the battery surfaces. Normally I'll wipe down a battery if I've been handling it before I install it. So it's something to keep in mind. And we do have O-ring protection on, whoops, sorry. We do have an O-ring protection on the battery cap as well for give us a certain level of water resistance. All right, so we talked about the accessories. Both ship with the bikini cap covers. Now, I don't particularly like these, but they do get the job done. They have a tendency of breaking on me. Now, this MD-ADS is a couple of years old, and you can see the bikini cap cover has not broken. So, I mean, this is on, off, on, off, on, off over several years of use, and it's held up well. No reason to think that the new bikini cap cover for the RB would be any less reliable. But with that said, on these sites, I normally run the, you can also get this from Primary Arms. These are made by Tango Down. This is their Tango Down. This is Tango Down's IO cover, which is a cover designed to go on the Aimpoint T1. Now, I've done previous video reviews of this mounted to the MD-ADS, and it does fit on the MD-ADS just fine. Now, the only drawback, of course, as you can see with the push button controls, there's no cutout on this cover. So you can still get access to the buttons. You still can push them. You just have to push through this cover. So it's a little bit more, requires a little bit more effort to turn on and turn off and adjust the intensity. But it does work on the MD-ADS. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test fit this onto the RB and see if it fits. I've not done that yet. I'm actually going to do that off camera because I got to take everything off. I'm going to take the battery cap off and the turret caps off and the base off, and we'll come back and we'll see if the Tango Down IO cover fits. Okay. Thank God I did this off camera. This does not fit 100%. There are some issues with proper fitment of this Tango Down IO cover, which I do believe can be addressed with a bit of trimming. But that's going to require you putting this on, kind of sizing it up and going back in, probably with a sharp X-Acto knife and doing a little bit of trimming. You can see right around this area right here, around the adjustable dial, it's not fitting correctly, so it's bunching up right here, and this piece is not laying down correctly, so this cap won't go on. Also, this notch right here for the indicator position is different on the T1 than on this RB. The RB, the one's up a little bit further. Again, that require a little bit of trimming with an X-Acto knife to get that to fit. And I think trimming right around this outer edge right here to allow this piece to pull down fully would work. So the back of it appears to fit pretty good. You can see it fits over the caps. This material is extremely flexible, so you can stretch it somewhat, but you definitely want to be careful about stretching it too much. You could rip something or tear it. I always suggest taking a hairdryer or a heat gun on a low setting and heating this up a little bit and getting it a little bit more malleable. You don't want to melt it, but heat it up a little bit. When material like this is warm, it's a little bit more flexible, so you can stretch it a little bit more without damaging. But you can see the rear of this works, and the caps snap in place. One thing nice about this cover is it comes with these built-in lens covers, and when you don't need them, you can just fold them back like this, and they snap out of the way. To me, it's a lot more convenient to have something like this than, say, a bikini cap cover, which I got to admit I've lost these plenty of times. So I like these covers. So this particular IO cover right here, or this Tango Down cover, I'm going to have to modify to get to fit on here. So you know, these are nice to have for the caps, as well as if you're running, like a flat dark earth furniture, and you want something, your red dot to match, sort of, you can go with the flat dark earth. Tango Down's got a couple different colors. So anyway, that's partial success with the Tango Down IO cover, but it it will require a little bit of modification to get that to fit. So in conclusion, this has turned out to be a little bit longer than I expected it to be. We've got a very, very good product, the successor to the MD-ADS, $20 cheaper, lifetime warranty, pretty much all of the same features, roughly all the same settings. One's got 11, one's got 12, 50,000 hour battery lifetime off a single CR2032 battery, 2 MOA dot, night vision compatible, water resistant, and high quality build. So we go from $170 down to $150. To me, that's a no-brainer. This is a win-win all the way across the board. And again, the only thing I could really come up with was the increase in weight. The MD-ADS weighed in at 4.4 ounces and the MD-RD at 5.7 ounces. That was it. And I will probably in the future be doing a shooting review of the RB on a rifle after I've had a while to test it. Again, I just got these recently. So anyway, that's going to conclude this tabletop review of the MD-RB AD and its comparison to its predecessor, the MD-ADS, made by Primary Arms. Link for the RB will be in the description. You can click on that link and go directly to Primary Arms website if you want to pick up one of these.